Okay, welcome back and thanks for participating. I appreciate you guys a lot. Um, Starting today, things are going to get a lot more technical, and we're going to start focusing in on your true role as a foreman, um, which is managing labor. Um, I've seen kind of a shift in the industry over, I don't know, the last 5 to 10 years, I guess. And I've kind of tried to analyze it and figure it out. And here's what I think's going on. Uh, the first thing you have to understand is that labor is going to be your biggest challenge. Managing labor profitably will be the biggest challenge you encounter as a foreman. Now, you have to understand that most of the other costs, material, equipment rentals, tools, subcontractors even, are pretty much all negotiated costs. So going into the project, generally, your project management team will have already bartered and negotiated and chased down the absolute best pricing on all of those categories that they can, and they'll have them locked in. Most of those numbers aren't going to change. Okay, they're pretty much set in stone. Um, but labor is a wild card. There's a lot of things that can affect your labor costs. If you're doing a project out of town and you don't fully understand the labor pool that you're going to be drawing from, uh, if that labor pool isn't as productive as you're accustomed to, could be higher priced than you're accustomed to, could be higher priced and less efficient than you're used to. So, that could impact your costs. Also, your management of that labor, okay? The company is handing you a team of workers to manage. If you're not good at managing people, you could impact that cost a lot. The contractor that you're working for, if you're a subcontractor and you're working for a general contractor, and that general contractor isn't very organized and your people have to stand around a lot, that's going to impact your labor costs. If there's another subcontractor who might be in front of you in the installation um, series that is short on manpower and they can't get things done on time, that can impact your manpower. So a lot of things can affect your labor budget. And I've kind of seen this shift in the industry where, I mean, contractors have known for a long time, but that the labor budget is the most difficult budget to manage. And I think they have been trying to overcome that by getting more organized uh, at the upper level, at the office, the estimate, the project management team, like that. And that's important. It's definitely important. But it seems to me like as they've gotten more organized at the upper tier, they've neglected the field. And what they've done is, when I was a younger foreman, I had a lot of responsibility. Um, a lot of the management of the project was my responsibility. Dealing with subcontractors, writing my own schedules, a lot of material stuff I negotiated on my own, not the initial package going in, but any incidental materials. And I think they've kind of taken those responsibilities away from the foreman, so that they've really dumbed down the position in my mind. And what I see nowadays is the position foreman is kind of title only, and what it really is just a lead person. The project managers kind of assume the role of foreman on the project because they think that this upper management team can force a better outcome on the project, instead of educating their foreman and teaching them how to do their job properly and manage the responsibilities that they're supposed to have. They've taken them away and they just dictate everything to the foreman. And that's a bunch of BS in my opinion. And where they're missing the boat is that it's great to have all of that organization at the upper level, and you definitely need that. But once you get it organized, you need to drive that down to the field level. The people in the field are the people who are going to make the money or lose the money. And if you don't include them in the plan, then it's really hard to affect a profitable outcome, because they don't know what the plan is. They're just there working every day, you know what I mean? So my opinion, and what I'm going to be teaching you, is to take those responsibilities back and manage your own project, okay? Where I think that will be a big benefit is that nowadays they are very organized at the upper level, thanks to new software products and just new methods of management that have come about. I think that's going to be a big benefit for you. You're going to have a good support base at the upper level, but you still need to do your job to manage the project. Okay, so this stuff's going to start getting a little more technical, and so I've written a lot of notes here, and I'm probably going to be reading a lot of it because I want to make sure that I don't miss anything. So forgive me for that. I may even stop this video a time or two, so if you see a cut in there or whatever, just forgive me, but I'm trying to get you the best and the best product that I can give you here, okay? All right. So running a project means doing your part to manage the budget for that project, and there's a lot of budgets, and the one that I'm going to dwell on the most today is going to be the labor budget, and this conversation is going to continue on over several more videos. But I'm also going to discuss some of the other budgets that you may be involved in. So budget decisions you make are going to affect the final outcome of the project. In order to manage those budgets, you need to know what the budgets are. And most of that information is going to come from the project manager on the project. And, by having a good understanding of these budgets and how they all fit together, it's going to give you the ability to ask that project manager the right questions and get the right information. The industry shift, that I just spoke about, where the foreman plays less of a role, in my opinion, is nonsense, and I'm going to encourage you to take some of that responsibility back. Everybody has to work together, but managing a project by a project manager who spends the majority of his time in an office or on other projects just doesn't work. Okay, so understanding budgets and playing a role in managing them, you're going to take a huge step up from most foremen in the industry today, I think. And so we're going to provide a broad overlook of budgets, and we're going to start with labor. The first thing you need to understand is your labor hours. So you need to know how many labor hours are in your project, or if you're a foreman and only managing a certain portion of the project, then you need to understand the hours in the portion that you are managing, okay? And it's your responsibility to know and to manage this budget. Now, when you get those hours, if you ask for them from your project manager, okay, here's my portion of this project, or here's, my project, I need to know how many hours I have, how many labor hours. When they give you those hours, they should be able to break them up by cost code. Okay, so I'm an electrician. That's what I relate to most, although I've done other types of work. But if I was an electrical foreman and I asked for my labor, I would expect it to be broken down by maybe underground conduit, above ground conduit, branch wire, feeder wire, light fixtures, trim out, kind of like that. So I can see my different categories of hours. And so depending on what work you're doing, and how big of a responsibility you have, you should be able to get your hours broken out by cost code like that. And then as you install your work, you're going to track your hours by those cost codes. Normally, when you report your time on your timesheet, it'll be under those, I worked on this cost code for 4 hours today and this cost code for 4 hours today. So you'll track those hours by cost code back into the accounting system, okay? It goes through your time card into accounting, and they pay you from that, but they capture those costs by category so that when the project's done, they can look at their estimate and they can say, okay, we had this budget for this cost code category and we spent this much. And project after project, they start comparing these budgets to actual costs, and then they fine-tune their estimating to match what's really happening on their projects, you see. So smart companies track these costs so that they can fine-tune their estimating. In other words, if they're, let's say feeder wire, pulling in feeder wire, if they're not charging enough money for that and they're losing money in that category, they need to boost those hours so they can be profitable. Conversely, if they're overcharging for that category and they want to, they could actually trim those costs some and be more competitive. So part of that estimating process is being competitive, because if you're not competitive, you don't get work. So when they really want a project, they need to know how lean can we go and still make money. And the way they do that is by tracking their costs so they know what the actual costs are. Okay, so ultimately what we're building up to here is I'm going to make it very easy for you to manage these labor budgets and to track these costs and know where you're at, so you have a little control over the profitability of your projects. And let's take a look at what some of these numbers mean. Um, the first thing that you need to know and understand is an average labor rate. So if you have several workers on your crew, let's say you've got 5 workers, if you added up all of their wages and divided by the number of workers, that would give you your average labor rate, okay? What that crew costs each per hour. So the reason that's important is because when you estimate a project, you know, that estimate will generally tell you the total hours in each category or in the entire project. And then what you need to do is build a fantasy crew as an estimator. You might say, okay, I'm going to have 2 journeymen for every apprentice, and I'm going to have 6 journeymen and 3 apprentices. I'm going to pay them in this pay range right here. And you might even pay the journeyman different amounts within a certain range, and same with the apprentices. And then you're going to add up all of these, the hourly wage for each one of those workers, divide it by the number of workers, and come up with an average labor rate. On average, 1 hour of work is going to cost me this amount. You're going to take that number there and you're going to multiply it by all of the hours in the project or all of the hours in the cost category to determine a dollar budget for that category of labor or the entire project, whichever. But the way you're going to convert the hours in the project into actual labor dollars is by figuring out that average labor rate and multiplying the hours times the average labor rate, okay? Now, once you go through this exercise on similar projects, you know, you may just render down to, you know, you don't have to build the fantasy crew every time. You can just say, hey, my average labor rate's going to be, you know, $28 an hour or whatever. Okay, use the same one every time, in other words, as long as it's a similar project. But that's how you convert your labor hours into labor budget, labor dollars. So the average labor rate times the total hours gives the labor budget. And hours aren't hours. Hours are dollars. You need to understand that. Okay? You're not managing hours out on that project. You're managing dollars, labor dollars. And all hours of labor aren't the same. Okay? Even though you're using an average labor rate to create your estimate out in the field, every hour doesn't cost the same amount. Okay, now it's common for companies to track hours or units installed. A lot of you people that do solar work, you know, they're counting how many modules you install every day, or how many torque tubes you get up, or how many posts you pound in the ground every day. That's a good gauge, but it's not really accurate, and it's not the way you want to track your labor. And here's why. If you had an average labor rate, and we're going to use round numbers just to make this very simple for everyone to understand, but if you had an average labor rate of $20 an hour and you multiplied it by your task hours, let's say it's 10 hours for the task, that's $200. That task budget is $200. And you, as the foreman, you can spend that $200 any way that you want. You can invest that money however you want. Okay, so if you took your $200 and you assigned it to a journeyman making $20 an hour, that journeyman would need to complete that work in 10 hours in order to make the company money. Now, you're probably saying, or you could be saying to yourself, okay, the budget's $200, $20 an hour times 10 is 200. If they use all of that task budget, how are they making money? Well, there's profit and overhead on top of all of that, okay? So that budget is your budget. You can spend it all and still make the company money. Okay, but what you could do is you could assign it to a worker only making $10 an hour. Maybe it's not so difficult of a task, and an apprentice can handle it instead of a journeyman. Now, that apprentice could actually work on that task for 19 hours and still make an additional $10 worth of profit. So, 10 hours or $10 times 19 hours is $190. You got $10 left over, right? So the way you assign tasks and the way you build your crew and the way that you manage those dollars are going to have a big effect on that budget. And part of your responsibility is understanding, what level of worker do I need to complete this task? Do I need a journeyman on everything that I do? Probably not. Apprentices can handle some of it. Cheaper labor. Another thing that comes into play is if you have a $20 an hour journeyman and you pair him up with a $10 an hour apprentice, okay, together that's $30 divided by the two people is $15 an hour average labor rate. So now you've gone from a $20 an hour average labor rate with your journeyman to $15 an hour by blending in an apprentice. Okay, and when you build your crew, and some of you aren't going to have control over building your crew. That's part of the responsibility that they've taken away from you at the higher level management team. Instead of letting the foreman, build his own crew, because most foremen don't know how to anymore, they build the crew for you. And you might want to have a say about that. Don't let your project manager just dictate things to you. You are the person working in the field. You've worked with these people. You know who's productive and who isn't, who's skilled at what and who isn't. So it's better for you to build your complement, your team, based on the tasks that you have to complete. I think you can do a better job of that, but you need to watch your average labor rate. Now, sometimes people think, okay, my average labor rate's $20 an hour, and we're just using round numbers here, okay? Wow, if I could build a crew and the average labor rate was only $10 an hour, man, I could bank a lot of money. Well, you might be able to. You might be wasting a bunch of money too, because if your crew isn't skilled enough and they install things improperly and keep having to go back and redo it twice or 3 times, then that's not cheap labor anymore. Now, if they did it 3 times, well, even if they did it 2 times, I already explained to you that once you have to do rework, it costs you 3 times as much, right? So now instead of paying $10 an hour average, you're paying $30, and your average labor rate's $20, right? So you see there's a balance there. You have to be able to select the right crew who can get things done. Now, optimally, if you can work a crew that is lower than the average labor rate by a couple dollars or whatever, but who puts out the production of, that you need, that your average labor rate dictates, you can save a couple dollars every hour And that money doesn't disappear. That money accumulates, and at the end of the project, if it's still there because you haven't had to do a bunch of rework, that becomes additional profit. That makes you look even better. Not only did you turn a profit on the project, you built additional profit, okay? So it's pretty complex. And, you know, I'm going to show you ways to, you know, create that scenario where you can bank some extra dollars every hour. It's not going to be a huge, it's not going to be like $5 an hour or $10 an hour, probably. A lot of it depends on geographically where you're working and, you know, how much work there is. Like right now in the country, aside from the coronavirus, there's a lot of work. Everybody's working. So it's hard to find quality labor. It's hard to go into a new area to start a project and just hire a bunch of local labor at a good rate because all the good people are already taken, right? So if your company already has a pool of good workers, you know, that you can draw from, you know, you can be selective and maybe step your game up a little bit. But, you know, it's all depends on the situation. Okay. So do you see how the wage of the worker or workers affects your labor dollars spent? The higher paid they are, the faster they need to complete tasks in order to maintain profitability. So, you know, you only have a certain budget. The more you pay each worker, the less hours they're going to get, which means the higher paid the worker, the more efficient they have to be. Normally, the higher paid worker is more efficient, and they'll be installing, material. But you have to watch out. A lot of people, and I've talked about this before too. People promote people they like. Okay, so people who are going to be on your crew are going to be at a higher level because someone liked them, not because they installed material at a profitable rate. As a matter of fact, most companies don't know, you know, how much, what the value of that employee is. They're just basing it off their gut feelings. And, you know, where that becomes really inaccurate is when people start liking them, okay? They're promoting them because they like them. They show up on time, they're there all day, right? Not because of how much material they installed every day. And I've already told you this, the most important thing that ever happens on your project is material gets installed. Companies don't track that. They don't track how much material each employee installs, so they don't know how profitable they are. They just know, hey, this guy seems knowledgeable. Knowledge doesn't do anything for you if you're not installing material. You can be the smartest guy on the block and go out there and do nothing all day and do nothing but cost me money. You see what I'm saying? I don't care if you're knowledgeable. I'd take a guy with some ambition who'll run his butt and get things done over a guy who knows everything any day of the week. You know, I'm looking for how much material are you installing correctly, not how much do you know. So, you know, knowledge is a great thing and it's very powerful if you use it properly. But if you promote someone just because they're knowledgeable, that's not a good value. I want to know how much material they install. Then I'll promote them. I'll promote them on that basis. I'm going to promote the people who work and make me money. Okay? The way you pair workers will have an effect on production as well. By pairing journeymen with apprentices, you can manage the average labor rate of the crew in order to stay closer to the estimated average labor rate. Now, I recommend, you know, until you learn your crew and what they're capable of, that you try to stay close to that average labor rate. That's just kind of a safe zone. It doesn't mean that you're going to be installing material at that rate. You might not. But at least stay in that general area until you figure out where you're at with your material installation. And then, if you find out they're not performing up to their level, then you need to start bringing in some better people until you can get there. If they're performing over their level, then you're golden, right? It's okay to exceed your average labor rate as long as you're matching the higher rate with higher production. So, sometimes I have to do this. I have to pay my crew more than the estimated average labor rate, but if I do that, I have to force more production out of them. And the reason I have to do that is, maybe the lower skilled work is just killing me. And I can't afford the mistakes. The mistakes are costing more than the higher wage, you know what I mean? So I bring in higher paid people to eliminate the rework and push them to get the higher production in order to balance the books. Okay, so can you see why you need to balance that? You need to monitor that balance of production and wage. You need to know that you're producing at the wage that you're paying your crew. If you don't, you could lose a lot of money over the long haul without even realizing it. So, if you're losing $3 an hour of production, every day, that accumulates, and over a month's time you look back and now you got a big deficit that somehow you need to overcome, and it usually doesn't happen. And this is what happens to companies. They don't track the production to the wage that they're paying. They don't track that, so they don't know what's going on. Till the end of the job, they look at their books and go, wow, we lost our ass. Okay, you need to know on a daily basis whether your crew is performing at the level that you're paying them, at the production level that you need, so that it doesn't accumulate like that over the course of the job and you don't lose money. If you're losing money, you need to know about it right away so you can either bring in better workers, fuss with the wage, and bring in higher paid people and force more production out of them. There's some options that you have, but you need to know what's going on every day, and I'm going to show you how to do that. It's been my experience the most profitable employees can be the most difficult to manage. Okay, so the most profitable employees you have on your project are going to be the ones that are normally the hardest to manage. And the reason for that is, have you ever, like when you're in high school, maybe you knew someone who could get straight A's in a class without even opening a book, right? It was just easy for them. Okay, there's workers like that. They come out and everything's easy for them. They put material together and they do it right, and they just keep moving through the project like that. And these people generally can get a lot of work done in a short period of time, and that leaves them a little extra time left over to be a pain in your ass. Okay, they're usually high strung, and they can either be cranky or they can just be jokesters, or a lot of different problems they may present. But I'm telling you from my experience, the most profitable employees you'll have on your crew are going to be the most difficult to manage. So you got to get thick skin. These employees are a tool for you to use to make a profit on your project, so your company likes you and you build a good reputation and they pay you more money. Okay? You have to prove yourself. People aren't going to pay you more money just because you took this course. If you don't use this information and to their benefit and make them more money. Okay? So those employees are a tool for you. So the last thing that you want to do is have one hurt your feelings and then run them off your job. You just shot yourself in the foot. Like the Charlie guy I told you about at the church school, who was, installing so much material, and he was smoking when he shouldn't have been. Look, I'm going to grow some thick skin, and I'm going to put up with quite a bit of crap from someone who's making me a bunch of money, because if I get rid of them, it's going to be more difficult for me to turn in a profitable project. So, if they hurt your feelings, ignore it. Now, I'll give you a real world example of what I'm talking about. In 2015, I built a project at the Tampa International Airport. It was a solar project, and it was on top of a 6-story parking garage, the economy parking garage out there. And of course, we built the project while the airport was open, and we had to pump concrete up 6 stories. It was comprised of like 128 concrete cast in place columns, and then 300 feet long concrete beams poured on top of them. And then on top of that was some metal structure that hold the actual modules. So, we were pumping concrete up 6 stories at nighttime. During the day, they were Foreman, and the whole parking garage was still open except the top floor. So there was cars going up and down the ramps all day long, people in a big hurry because they're going to miss their flight. And I had to bring my material, ton of material, up to this top deck at nighttime. And some of it was pretty big, so I had a pickup truck with a huge long, like a 40-foot long trailer. It was pretty long. Might have been 35. It was long. And I hired this guy, his name was John, to drive this material up at nighttime, and he had a couple guys on his crew, and he'd stage the material at nighttime. We'd come in the next day and it'd be there, and we could go to work. Now, I didn't need material up, taken up to the top deck every day, and sometimes, depending on how deliveries fell, I'd have John working days. And then maybe at 12 o'clock in the afternoon, I'd say, hey, John, I got a material delivery coming in. I need you to get it up to the top deck tonight. Can you go home and go to sleep and come back at like 8 o'clock tonight? And John was like, sure, no problem, Take care of it, Dennis. And anytime I asked him to do that, he'd do it. And he did an excellent job of getting that material up there. I didn't have one single problem with material going up. He didn't run into anything. He didn't, damage anything. He didn't make any airport people angry. It all went real smooth. But when John was working days, John was a pain in the ass. He made everybody mad. He made the construction manager for the client angry all the time, because whenever he'd go up to the top deck, he had a truck, he'd be driving too fast up there. Constantly, that guy was coming to me and telling me, John's driving too fast up on the deck, and you need to do something about it. And I'd talk to John, and, the other workers, talking to him all the time, and just, making them angry and stuff. And at one point, late in the project, of course, I'd go talk to John, and, I'd say, John, look, you got to stop doing this. I mean, I had a good relationship with him, but man, I was getting tired of talking to him. But late in the project, he did something that really hacked off my structural superintendent. And this guy and I had worked in Iraq together. I really liked him a lot. We were very close. And he came to me one day and he said, you need to fire that John guy. I forget what he did to him. He did this and that, and I'm not putting up with that anymore. And you just need to get rid of him. And I refused to fire him. I refused to fire him because I was close to the end of my project. And to find someone who would come to work there, work days, 3 days, and go home at noon whenever I told him to, and come back at 8 o'clock and work till 5 o'clock in the morning and not damage anything, and understood the flow of my materials and what materials I was dealing with. I mean, it was just a nightmare to try to replace that person at the drop of a hat like that. And I said, I told him, I'm sorry. I'm really sorry John made you mad, and I'll go talk to him again. But I'm not getting rid of him. I'm not letting him go. And, me and this guy were very close, and it just happened that he had his family coming into town that day, I think. And he had invited me to go to dinner with him, but I didn't know where they were going. Well, he got so mad, he never told me where they were going for dinner, and he didn't talk to me for like 3 or 4 days. I mean, he was really mad that I didn't fire John. But look, someone's making you money and doing a good job. Sometimes you have to put up with it for a while. But listen, the day I was done with John bringing material up to that deck, John was gone. And it was one of the best days of my life. Didn't make John happy, but okay. This is just some of the nonsense that you have to put up with. And what you have to weigh it against is not, I don't like this person, or this person makes my life difficult. You have to weigh it against, is this person profitable and safe on my project, and getting the job done. Because I'm telling you right now, I'm just telling you, the most profitable people you're going to deal with are going to be the most difficult to manage. Accept it. Okay, you need to pay close attention to your actual average labor rate as you build your project. You have to understand that the average labor rate if the average labor rate of your crew exceeds the average labor rate that was used to estimate the project, you have to install material faster than projected by the estimate in order to maintain that budget. Okay, now that's possible to do, and you can do it, but you have to keep a close eye on it. We've already talked about that. Now, if your crew has, let's just say, 10 hours to complete a task and they only use 7, those 3 hours don't disappear. You know that. That money for those extra 3 hours goes into a savings account. And at the end of the project, if it's still there, it's additional profit. And that's where you want to get to. So by now you should be able to see that although you're scheduling hours, you're tracking dollars. And this is where companies don't make the connection. They schedule hours and they track hours. Hours don't necessarily mean that much in relation to dollars. Just because you're hitting your hours doesn't mean you're hitting your dollars. And they schedule hours and they track hours and they think, man, we're doing a good job, and they're going along. They don't know their average labor rate's higher than it ought to be, and they're spending too much for their labor, and they're losing money through the whole project. Then they get to the end, they say, we completed, right on time with our hours, and we lost our ass. Okay? So you're scheduling hours, you're tracking dollars. All right, another thing you need to be aware of is labor burden. And, these are costs that your employer has to pay in addition to the employee's wage. It has to do with things like workman's comp, health and welfare benefits, paid holidays, vacations, cell phone, a truck maybe for you, cell phone or truck really wouldn't be labor burden, but things like that are associated with your wage that the employee has to pay in addition to the hourly rate you get, taxes. So when you start your project, you need to ask the project manager what your average labor rate is for your project. You need to know what that requirement is so that when you build your crew, you can be close in there until you can figure out your production ratio. Okay? And when you ask them, you need to find out if it includes labor burden or not. Because there's personally, I like to track unburdened labor, and here's why. It's common on a new project to hire new employees, a bunch of new employees, especially if you're doing an out-of-town project. A lot of times companies have 30, 60, 90-day probation period before a lot of these benefits kick in. Okay, and so some of the employees have different burden than the other employees, and it just becomes kind of muddy water, if you know what I mean. So if you can, try to get yourself an unburdened rate. Track it by unburdened labor. So they may say, okay, your average labor rate is, $35 an hour, and that's burdened. Well, then say, what do you consider your burden as a percentage? Okay, so you can do the math and deduct that off of the burdened labor to come up with a raw labor number. It's just easier to deal with. And then when you hire people or they hire people, all you have to do is ask what's their wage. Okay, when they tell you their wage, they're not going to, normally won't tell you their burdened wage. They'll just tell you their wage that they pay them on their check. Okay, so if you know what their percentage is for labor burden might be 35%, you're going to deduct 35% from $35 an hour, and that'll be your average, your unburdened average labor rate. Okay, but try to track your projects by unburdened labor if you can. I'll show you a way to go either way, but it's just easier if you're tracking unburdened labor. Okay, it's your responsibility to select the worker or workers with the strengths needed to complete the task on or under budget. It should be your responsibility. Your project manager might try to dictate that to you. Fight them on it. Try to hire your own people if you can, or select your own people from the company's roster if you can. It's generally a free-for-all with other foremen to try to get the best labor on your project, because everybody knows, if you can get an edge that way, it's easier to make a profit on your project. But fight for it. Fight like everybody else does. Try to get the best people, and by best I mean most productive. At times it may be your responsibility to select and build a crew who meets these requirements. A lot of times companies have sent me out to a job out of town and run an ad in the paper and have them come to my job site, and I interview them and I hire the ones I want on the spot. I fill out all the paperwork and the whole bit. Depending on the company you work for, you may be doing that yourself. Some larger companies probably have an HR department, but you still might be able to collect resumes yourself and submit those to HR and say, here's the people I want on my crew. So instead of saying, hey, HR department, hire me a journeyman, go find your own journeyman, someone that's profitable, get their resume, submit it, and say, hey, I want you to hire this journeyman for my project. Anything you can do to get the best labor you can is going to make your life a lot better. The availability of profitable workers within your organization at the time of your project will play a huge role in this, but don't overlook bringing in new talent if necessary to succeed. You need to use every advantage to complete on budget. If the available workforce will not provide that result, you need to speak up and ask for permission to locate new talent. You're the person responsible for managing that crew, and you need to let your project manager know if you're having labor issues. There are ways to track individual worker profitability, and I'm going to introduce you to that in the future. By tracking each worker's profitability, you can produce hard numbers that will prove your argument. I'm a huge advocate of trying to help employees become profitable. Many times you end up replacing a costly employee only to replace them with a more costly employee. This happens a lot when, the economy is good and the workforce is small and unskilled. Okay, you might have a person on your project that's really not that profitable, but if you get rid of them, you're going to get his brother or his sister or his aunt or someone else who isn't profitable, if you know what I mean, just as an example. It's better for you to try to train that employee and make them profitable. Sometimes you can do that by pairing them up with someone who has the skills that they need to learn. Okay, as long as you're pressuring them to turn in profitable results and they're getting the training that they need, most people will step up and make it happen for you. Don't let the personalities get in the way. You can't work with everybody that you're just in love with. They can't all be your friends, okay? And some of them you're not going to understand, but I don't give a damn. You don't have to understand them as long as they're profitable. Profitable is what you're looking for. If you find that you do need to replace a worker who's not installing material profitably, it should be a last resort. You should try very hard first to make that employee profitable. I'm a big believer in that, and just getting rid of them and bringing someone else isn't going to necessarily solve your problem. You might end up with the same result. A highly profitable employee alongside a not so profitable employee can still provide profitable results. So if you've got one worker overperforming and one underperforming, it's just like the average labor rate. It's the average production rate, okay? Together they're installing at the proper rate. So be conscious of that when you pair people up. Pair productive people with not so productive so you can balance that flow out if possible. And I'm going to provide you with the tools to figure all of that out. Okay, now we're going to talk about some different budgets. I'm going to talk about equipment rentals. Equipment rentals are a great place to make money. They're also a great place to lose money. Most people understand this, but if you don't know, when you rent equipment, you can rent it by the day, week, or month, okay? And if you rent a piece of equipment for 2 days, now you're into a week rental. You rent it 2 weeks, you might as well keep it for the whole week, because that second day is so expensive that it almost makes it worth it just to keep it for a week. If you rent it for a week and a day, you might as well keep it for a month. That's about how it works out. It just gets really expensive once you roll over a rental period to the next tier. So if you can cap it at that 1 day or cap it at that 1 week, you can really save a lot of money there. Okay, once you roll over 1 week and 1 day is as good as a month. There are delivery and pickup charges. So if you can, coordinate your pickups or deliveries to deliver multiple pieces of equipment and have a conversation with that rental company up front. Hey, I'm going to have you drop multiple pieces of equipment at one time I want you to minimize my delivery and pickup charges. They'll usually do that for you. If you don't say anything, they'll probably charge you a delivery charge for every individual piece of equipment, even if they do bring them all at one time, because they'll figure you're not smart enough to know the difference, okay? So talk about that up front before it gets delivered. It's always harder to argue about a bill after it's already, been created and mailed out to you. Whenever you call material off, always make sure you get a confirmation number. Okay, and note that number and hang on to it, because it's my experience that rental equipment billing, especially when you get multiple pieces on your site and different things are happening for months on end, those bills are pretty common to be jacked up. And you should be looking at those invoices when they come in before your company pays them. Okay, because you've got the confirmation number, you know the date it was called off, and you can make sure that they're accurate. If you had a conversation about delivering multiple pieces for one delivery fee, and they charged you, delivery for each individual one, you want to have that conversation. You want to see that invoice, because that is money that's going to come out of your budget. And if you save money on any of these other budgets, let's say you beat your equipment rental budget by $2,000 on your project, okay, that money could be converted to labor. That could become a extra labor budget for you. What I'm saying is, it's possible to go over budget on your labor and under budget on some of your other budgets and still have a profitable project, right? Okay, so let's have this conversation, and we're going to do some work to ultimately verify this, but I have worked for companies in the past, okay, that when they were estimating, didn't provide enough hours in their project for the work that they were doing, okay? But they always had profitable projects. And what they did was, they knew in their mind, hey, we're going to go over budget on labor on this project. We always do. So let's add some extra money in there for material. Let's jack up our material costs a certain percentage. And sure enough, they'd go over budget on their labor. They'd come in under budget on their material. Between the two of them, profitable project. Okay? Now that's a terrible way to do business. It's not necessarily a stupid way. What if you hired someone as a foreman and you said, hey kid, I'm only going to pay you this much money right here up front hourly, but I'm going to give you a bonus for every project you turn in profitably. You just screwed them on the labor, right? How are you going to turn in a profitable project when they already know they're shorting you the hours on the labor, and they're not going to share this extra material budget with you? They're just going to say, here's how many hours we had in the project, and here's how many you used, and you used too many, and guess what? You're not getting a bonus. Okay, you need to be smarter than them. And I'm going to show you how to do that. Okay, so that you know what the real number should be. And going in, you're going to say, hey, you don't have enough hours in this project. There's not enough hours in here for me to manage this project. This isn't right. Okay, so I'm just telling you some of the games that get played out there. And that's why it's important to know all the numbers going in, and don't think that necessarily your project manager is going to tell you the right numbers either, because he might say, well, I'm afraid they're going to go over hours on this project, so I'm only going to tell him 90% of the hours instead of 100%. I'm going to keep 10% in reserve. That way, when they go over on their hours, I'll have a little cushion. I can still make a profitable project. That's nonsense too. You know the numbers. You need to know the numbers. If anyone's going to trim those numbers and bank some hours, that needs to be you, not the project manager. You need to know what those hours are. So we're going to work on figuring that out in the future. Equipment rentals are a great place to make money. Equipment rentals are a great place to lose money. So, one place where you commonly lose money is you complete the work with the rental equipment, then it sits around for another week or two, which might roll into a whole nother month rental. So you just paid for a whole nother month you didn't need because you didn't get it out of there fast enough. Soon as you're done with it, get rid of it. Make sure you do that diligently. Track when it comes on site and when it leaves so that you know where it's at in its rental cycle, so you can argue with the rental company. I'll show you ways to figure out how much labor you need to throw at each piece of equipment so that if you need to get something out there in a hurry, you can determine how many hours worth of work. Sometimes it's more profitable to work a little bit of overtime and get the equipment off site, and I'll show you how to do that as well. Most project managers will solicit quotes for the material on your site. Probably includes, depending on your type of project, lighting, switchgear, wire, conduit, solar modules, racking, whatever. So you'll probably have less of a say in those budgets, but as a foreman, what you might have control over is incidental materials. When they do a takeoff off a set of drawings to build a project, they can't foresee site-specific conditions. And a lot of times you get out on site and you go, oh, shoot, we planned on having a 90 here. We should need 245s or something. Okay, now you got to go to the wholesale house and get 245s, or it could be anything. Those material runs to the wholesale house every day can cost you an absolute fortune, and you're going to pay a premium for that material unless you get a hold of a supply house and up front and say, hey, I'm building this project. I know I'm going to have some material needs that aren't addressed through the project management. I want to negotiate pricing with you on those. If you'll negotiate good pricing with me, I promise you I'll give you all of that work. Okay, and then it's just a matter of cutting down those runs, and I'm going to show you how to address that further on in this course as well, because you need to stop the daily runs to the wholesale house. They cost a frickin' fortune. You're taking a journeyman or whoever and sending them off to go get material. Now they're not installing material, they're chasing it down. Okay, so and it looks bad. It looks like you're not organized if you're constantly running to the wholesale house and the guys in the office see all of those material tickets and look at this, he went 3 times this day and 2 times that day and 7 times this week and blah blah blah. So you don't want to do it. I'm going to show you how to fix that. Subcontractors are another area of the budget that you'll need to pay close attention to. Now, it's my opinion that if you have a subcontractor on your site and you're managing them, you need to do your best to make sure that subcontractor is profitable on your project. Okay? And the reason I say that is this. What's going to happen if they're not profitable? And what's going to happen if they're not profitable on the next one and the next one? What's going to happen? They're going to jack their price up on you. They're giving you a good price through your own ignorance and mismanagement and preventing them from being able to make a profit. You're jacking the cost of your own project up. You see what I'm saying? You need to manage them well so they can make a profit. That way you can keep those costs as low as possible. Now, there are even, it's common within companies, if they know who is going to be, subcontractors, if they know who's going to be managing the project on your side, if they don't like that person because they cost them too much money, when they bid the job, they'll jack it up just for the name of the person who's going to be managing it. They might give a better price for a different foreman and a higher price for this foreman. You see what I'm saying? Because there's such a variety of profitability amongst, foremen. You want to be a profitable foreman. You want to make sure that the work's ready for them when they show up. You want to make sure they have a clean working area, same as you expect from your general contractor. Okay, you don't need to squander your entire budget paving the way for them or anything, but you need to be organized and ready for them so they can get in and get out. That's your responsibility. And you need to be very knowledgeable about their scope of work, because you don't want to go up to them and tell them, hey, you need to get this running over here or whatever. And they go put it in for you, then all of a sudden you get a change order because it wasn't in their scope of work. You don't want to be asking them to do work outside their scope of work, okay, unless you ask them for a change order if it's not, okay, if it's not part of their responsibility. Get better pricing up front. So be aware of what's in their scope and what isn't in their scope. Don't ask them to do any work outside their scope unless you ask them to give you a separate change order price for it first so you can get it approved. Otherwise, that billing's coming into the office and you're not even going to know it's coming, and all of a sudden now your subcontract budget's out of whack, right? So you need to view that subcontract agreement, and you need to understand it. You need to get that from your project manager. You need to say, hey, I'm going to be managing the subcontractor. I need to know what their scope of work is and what we're paying them and what we're paying them for. So ask for that. Sometimes as a foreman, I've even had to hire subcontractors and approve their contract and write their scope of work. We've already talked about this, but it's important to understand that if you create savings in material, equipment, and rental costs and subcontract costs and go over on labor, you could still turn in a profitable project. The last thing on my list is per diem. It's common to hire out-of-town employees and have to pay them per diem to stay there in the location while they build the project. Very common on solar projects because they're all out in the middle of nowhere, right? But if you are hiring your crew, the best thing that you can do is hire local so you don't have to pay those costs. That's how you can offset them. Another way is to, pair them up in a hotel room, pay for the hotel room, put 2 to a room. You could rent an apartment, stick 4 or 5 in there, 3 or 4, whatever. Apartments are generally cheaper per month than hotels. Some places you can find furnished apartments. And then, of course, you can also negotiate with a hotel. If you know you're going to have a bunch of workers, you can go in and say, hey, I'm going to have a bunch of workers. They're going to stay here for 3 months, and I want, good pricing. All hotels won't negotiate with you, but a lot of them will. So per diem is another area where you may have to control a cost. Okay, there may be other budgets in your project that you're going to have responsibility for. That's something you need to discuss with your project manager and make sure you do that. You need to know what those costs are, and you need to manage them properly. And that's it for today, and we'll continue on next Tuesday. And thank you guys very much for being here. I appreciate every one of you.